What up, peeps? It's time for another episode of Gross Pointe Bake. This show is all about the numbers, the grosses, how much money was made, how many people bought tickets, how many butts was in the seats, how many albums was sold, how many people watched what. That's what this show is all about, man. We taking the opinions out and we talking the numbers, man. And I'm doing another Versus episode. Last Versus episode I did Steven Seagal versus Jean-Claude Van Damme. And who was putting more butts in the seats at the box office? Steven Seagal came out on top, even though I feel like Van Damme was more the people's choice, especially black folks. But apparently more people wanted to see the Steven Seagal movies. So it was weird. It was a weird dynamic because people was like, no, Van Damme. Well, why wouldn't y'all buying the tickets then? Why wouldn't y'all go into the movies to reflect that at the box office? Because, you know, Steven Seagal is not Mr. Personality at all. He don't even have a charming accent like Jean-Claude did. But Steven Seagal came out on top. Now, we're going to have a comedy battle. A comedy off. Kind of, sort of comedy off. It's not really a comedy off because it can be dramas in this battle too. But we're doing comedy giants facing off. Eddie Murphy versus Jim Carrey. Who was putting more butts in the seats? Now, in this, I'm keeping it domestic grosses. And I'm adjusting for inflation, so keep that in mind. So I'm gonna do their top 5 each, the top 5 grossers, and they will go head to head. And then I'll give you the total gross as well. But we're gonna compare these top 5 just like we did with Van Damme and Steven Seagal. So let's get into it, man. First up, Eddie Murphy. Okay, Eddie Murphy's top 5 movie grossers in his career. Number 5. The Nutty Professor from 1996. It grossed the equivalent of $267 million at the domestic box office. The Nutty Professor was a comeback for Eddie. Like, you know, he had a couple bricks. The Distinguished Gentleman didn't really resonate with anybody, and then Vampire in Brooklyn bombed at the box office. So now, The Nutty Professor was the return to form for Eddie Murphy. Now he was in his bag. He did amazing character work in The Nutty Professor. He was multiple characters, and it was seamless. So it was just like, yo, Eddie Murphy is back. The Nutty Professor did great at the box office. In 96, it was cracking. That was like movies was making money in 96. That's the year Independence Day came out, and Twister and Mission Impossible. So The Nutty Professor stood out and was one of the biggest movies of that year. $267 million at the box office. Number 4, Dr. Dolittle. Dr. Dolittle made the equivalent of $281 million at the box office. He followed The Nutty Professor up with Dr. Dolittle, and it was another smash for Eddie Murphy. He playing the doctor that can talk to animals, that can hear what they're saying, and that resonated with people. People was pulling up. It was making that box office loot, if you will. They made a sequel that made loot as well, not as much as the first, but you know. And then The Professor 2 did well too, but it didn't do as good as the first. So we got Dr. Dolittle and Nutty Professor for Eddie Murphy, coming in at 5 and 4. Number 3, Coming to America. Coming to America made $285 million adjusted for inflation. That's one of Eddie Murphy's most loved movies, one of his biggest hits, and it holds up today. People still love that movie. The sequel didn't really work out, but people love the first Coming to America. It's a classic. It's probably one of the best comedies I've ever seen. I love every mineral of this movie, every molecule. And Eddie Murphy's character work in this movie was absolutely amazing, phenomenal. A lot of people didn't even know he was an old man at the barbershop until later. They was like, yo, that was Eddie Murphy? That's when you know you killing it on the character work. Amazing film. I still love it. It's one of the best of all time. Also, I'm gonna let you know, I took out voiceovers in this top 5, in this battle right here. I took out voiceovers. I took voiceovers off the table. Why? Because I wanted to make it a little bit closer, a little bit more fair. The Shrek movies, which feature Eddie Murphy doing voice work, made so much money that, that's gonna be hard hitting to Jim Carrey. So I'm just trying to make it. I'm trying to make it a better battle here. And I will say that Eddie Murphy's voice work in the Shrek movie is iconic. Like, it wasn't a case where anybody could have been Donkey. It's not that at all. Eddie Murphy is Donkey, and Donkey is Eddie Murphy. There's no way around that. He made that character just like, man, this is something we never knew we needed, and his voice is instrumental in that. You can't replace Eddie Murphy in Shrek. So I just want to throw that out there. And the Shrek movies made all the money. Shrek 2 just made crazy, stupid money. So anyway, number 2, Beverly Hills Cop 2. Beverly Hills Cop 2 made the equivalent of $360 million at the domestic box office. It was a sequel to the hit film Beverly Hills Cop. It was a hit. In my opinion, it had better action sequences. It was funny. It was hilarious. It was one of the biggest hits of that year. I think it was 1987, I believe. That was the year Fatal Attraction came out, 3 Men and a Baby, and Beverly Hills Cop 2 was right there. One of Eddie Murphy's biggest hits, as you can see from this list, is number 2, only to be beaten by the OG Beverly Hills Cop. Beverly Hills Cop grossed the equivalent of $621 million at the box office in America. Beverly Hills Cop grossed the equivalent of $621 million. One movie, one comedy movie about a cop from Detroit who shows up to Beverly Hills to solve a case. $621 million at the domestic box office. Crazy. One of the most successful films of all time. One of the highest grossing rated R movies of all time. And it still ranks high in the list of top movies of all time. So there you have Eddie Murphy's top 5. His top 5 counts to the equivalent of $1.8 billion. That's just his top 5. $1.8 billion. His debut film as a leading man, 48 Hours, grossed the equivalent of $226 million. That was his debut out the gate. His debut film grossed $226 million out the gate. Now, let's get to Jim Carrey's top 5. Coming in at number 5, The Mask grossed the equivalent of $269 million at the box office. The Mask came on the heels of Ace Ventura, and it was based on the comic book, and it made all the money. It was like, yo, man, this dude that play Ace Ventura, man, he's hilarious, man. And then you want to go see him in The Mask. And The Mask had box office to back that up, man. Smoking, if you will. And he had some dynamite teeth, man. They were a little too big, but they was white and straight. Crazy teeth. Some people out here with the mask teeth, low-key, man. You did too much with the fake teeth. Anyway, number 4, Dumb and Dumber. Dumb and Dumber did $277 million at the box office, domestically inflated. Dumb and Dumber was a hilarious film directed by the Farrelly brothers. Came on the heels of The Mask. Let me tell y'all how amazing Jim Carrey's run was. Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber came out within a year of each other. All 3 of these movies within a year of each other. That's crazy. And they were making all the money. Dumb and Dumber, $277 million adjusted for inflation. Crazy money. The sequel didn't fare as well. Probably waited too long for it to happen, and Dumb and Dumber holds up. People love Dumb and Dumber even to this day. Number 3. This is a movie it took me forever to watch. I didn't watch it until like 2021. Liar Liar. Liar Liar grossed $362 million adjusted for inflation. It was a huge hit for Jim Carrey. It was his bounce back film after The Cable Guy did lackluster box office. Liar Liar was a return to form. People was lining up just to see this guy who could no longer tell a lie, who was an attorney, and it made the equivalent of $362 million at the box office. That's big money. That's big money right there. Big money. Big money, if you will. Number 2, Bruce Almighty. Bruce Almighty grossed the equivalent of $369 million at the U.S. box office, adjusted for inflation. Now Jim Carrey's playing God. He has all the powers of God. And people were showing up, even though, Morgan Freeman was the real God in this, but, you're God for a little bit. And Bruce Almighty made all the money, man. It was a big hit for Jim Carrey. And he was back in that comedy element, because, he was going to comedy, drama. But now he was back in that element, and people showed up. It was in the summertime, and people was all in. And number one, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. $442 million domestically inflated. That's Jim Carrey's top grossing film in his resume. It made the equivalent of $442 million of domestic box office. You can't even recognize Jim Carrey in that joint, but it's him, trust. Huge hit, directed by Ron Howard, surprisingly. I never liked the cinematography in that movie. I didn't like the way it looked, but it was a monster hit. Came out around Christmas, and I don't know if y'all know this about movies, but the Christmas holiday season is the most lucrative box office season of the whole year. You want your movie to come out around that time, because the movies make crazy money during the holiday season, and The Grinch is no exception. $442 million. I never got into that movie in particular, but that's just me. But apparently people want to pull up. Now, even though Jim Carrey has been in several films before he blew up, I just found out he was in Peggy Sue Got Married. He was in Earth Girls Are Easy. He was in Once Bitten. He was in a Dirty Harry movie. He was out here working, but I feel like his coming out party wasn't until Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. So I would give that as his debut, because if I did his real debut, it would probably be pennies. So Ace Ventura came out the gate grossing the equivalent of $162.3 million. So his debut didn't do as well as Eddie Murphy's debut. So Jim Carrey's top five comes in at $1.7 billion for his top five. The crazy part, they are $100 million apart from one another. Eddie Murphy beats Jim Carrey by $100 million. Now that might not sound like a lot, but when we go on 1.8 billion versus 1.7 billion, Eddie Murphy wins by $100 million. So it was a close battle, but Eddie Murphy comes out on top. Now, when you scale back, you pan out, and you look at their total domestic box office for all their films, Eddie Murphy is sitting on $3.8 billion domestically. Jim Carrey is at $3.03 billion domestically. Worldwide, Eddie Murphy is at $7.2 billion worldwide. Jim Carrey is at $5.7 billion worldwide. So Eddie wins in all categories. If you inflate or deflate, and then when you throw Shrek in there, it's just, a smack up. Not really a smack up, but, Eddie Murphy's on top. So that's the battle of the comedy giants, and Eddie Murphy reigns supreme. Who did you think was going to win? Did you think it was going to be Eddie or Jim? Man, be real. Be real, man. Are you surprised by the outcome? Are you surprised by their top fives? Let me know. And in their top fives, what are your favorite within their top fives? So Eddie Murphy, you got Beverly Hills Cop, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Coming to America, Dr. Dolittle, or The Nutty Professor. For Jim Carrey, you got The Grinch, Bruce Almighty, Liar Liar, Dumb and Dumber, and The Mask. What are your favorite of theirs in their top fives? Let me know in the comment section below. My favorite in their top fives, Coming to America is my favorite Eddie one. And my favorite Jim one is Dumb and Dumber. That's just me, though. You know what I'm saying? But let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what other kind of verses y'all would want to see in these box office or record sale streets. Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as usual, we out here.